the health department called us up and they said, you can't put bugs in your food. As the health department, we're trying to keep bugs out of the food.
Welcome to Mark Cuban's Founder Focused, a show about the ins and outs of entrepreneurship, led by some of the successful founders Mark Cuban has invested in. Today we're talking with Rose and Laura, the founders of Chirps, about what it takes to convince people to eat bugs.
Hi, I'm Rose.
And I'm Laura.
And we're the co-founders of Chirps.
And we make food with bugs.
We started with our first product, our cricket chips, as what we call our gateway bug to introduce the world to eating bugs.
The beginning of Rose and Laura's edible bug journeys began in college. While in Tanzania, Laura ate a caterpillar, and she said it tasted just like lobster. And meanwhile, on a trip in Beijing, Rose was convinced into trying scorpion, which she described as tasting like shrimp. And you can kind of see the resemblance.
So after we ate bugs abroad, we were both like, this tastes good, but how do we get other people to eat insects? And that's kind of how this whole journey started. So at first, we just got whole bugs, fried them up, tried to feed them to our friends, and our friends totally freaked out. And so that's become the question of how do we put this into a form? How do we change this? How do we make this more accessible? And that's how we started using cricket powder.
People had this idea that bugs were ooey gooey and slimy, and so we realized to offset this mindset, we had to go crunchy. And that was a big part of why we chose chips. Find somebody who doesn't like a chip, you know? That's the best way to introduce, and in the future we can come out with other products with other bugs, but this is the first step.
Something we talk a lot about is sushi. In sushi, we have all sorts of crazy things, raw fish, sea urchin, kind of name it. But people eat it because it's in that really pretty form.
Rose and Laura worked with chefs and their university's food science department to nail down a recipe for their chips that they could take to manufacturers. Now, it's hard enough to find a manufacturer willing to just whip up a batch of chips for a small startup like they had. So imagine then how much harder that becomes when you tell them that one of the main ingredients is crickets.
All the manufacturers were like, wait, what? Isn't that a contaminant?
So we basically just sat down with the phone, called 400 manufacturers, and finally one said yes, and that's how we started.
Yeah. Finding a list of 400 manufacturers, especially in the tortilla chip space, is extremely difficult. They're in very, very traditional sources of listings. And so the way that we found manufacturers was one, just through white pages, yellow pages, and there's actually another big book of manufacturers and commercial kitchens that's about 10 years old.
Yeah, we found this from the archives and we're looking through it and calling numbers.
The other thing is just relying on the manufacturing networks. They oftentimes know each other, and so once we found the right person, if they couldn't work with us, the next ask would be, who else do you know in your network who could help us? And I think that's one of the best questions to ask.
Making friends with people in the food industry who are just a stage ahead of you is so important, right? So early on when we were just starting, we made friends with other small food businesses, but that actually were in stores when we weren't. And then finding out exactly what they did. You just can't get everything from a book or the internet. I think as millennials, we're used to being able to Google the answers to anything. And when it came to finding a manufacturer, and in fact in the food industry in general, that just wasn't the case.
So 400 manufacturers and a terse back and forth with the health department later, they were finally ready to bring edible bugs to the masses. However, investors did not share their same level of enthusiasm.
Every investor we talked to said, this is the worst idea I've ever heard.
So the only way for the two to raise the money was to go earn it on their own. And they did. Much of Chirps' initial funding came from pitch competitions, where Rose and Laura were able to lay out their vision for Chirps and what it could be. They won enough money to get the company going, and unexpectedly, something that ended up being almost more valuable than the money itself.
When we first started, no one would fund us. And I think that was a blessing in disguise, looking back. The only way we could get funding was through pitch competitions. And that actually is the best thing, because we were able to not only use this to get funding, but to test messaging. We would go into each pitch with a new narrative. We'd try out different facts. We'd see what would resonate most with people when they would have the most cheers or the reactions on their faces. If you're an early stage entrepreneur or founder, please go out and test your messaging over and over again. Do not hide your idea. Don't think someone's gonna steal it. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's how you execute it. And so go out there and figure out what messaging resonates with people the best and stick to that.
Maybe the most important distinction to make about Chirps' story is that Rose and Laura don't just see themselves as a company that sells chips. Their vision and what makes them passionate entrepreneurs is that they saw a big problem that needed solving, and they're using their own unique experiences to tackle it.
We came into this industry not to just sell chips, but we really wanted to change the food system from the ground up. About a third of our food is completely wasted and just thrown away. There's so many problems, and our population is growing to about 9 billion people by 2050. How are you gonna feed all these people when there's no fresh water, the land is drying up? Can we change this with bug protein and relying on insect protein as a replacement for initially soy and whey protein and eventually meat?
Right.
And that's always been our vision. We're an advocacy company, an education company that happens to sell food, delicious food. We're gonna tackle this and keep working at it for however long it takes, because life's about working on one of those big problems, not the small ones.
It's important to remember, not everything can be done on the internet. Talking to the people around you in your industry can reveal possibilities that you wouldn't have otherwise found. And also, don't forget to test your messaging. You only get one chance to make a first impression with a potential customer, and it needs to be as effective as possible.